Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning and welcome to Encounter. My name is Joe Sellepack and I'm your host today for our Encounter show. As many of you are aware, we have a new pope in the office, and popes are generally, for us who come from a Protestant tradition, are kind of interesting, and for those of you that come from a Catholic tradition, it's pretty much integral to your faith, I think. So it's always good for us to talk a little bit about what's happening in churches and how larger denominational issues kind of come down to the local level. And here to talk with us about what it means to have a new pope is Tim Taugher from St. Francis of Assisi Parish. Welcome, Father Tim.
Thanks, Joe. Nice to be with you.
It's great to be with you. And so why is a pope important to Catholics?
Well, the Pope's certainly part of our Catholic tradition. In our tradition, we believe is the successor of Peter. So we maintain that view and see that lineage through our history of popes. I think this one's Pope Francis is number 270 something. So it's a long line of successors. But so that is the primacy of Peter, and that's part of our Catholic tradition and ecclesiology as we see the church governing. And also in our daily liturgies, I mean, every time we pray the liturgy, we pray for the Pope. His name is always, mentioned as long with the bishops. So that name, whoever it is, and right now Francis is in our daily masses. So there's always that connection, and I think with the liturgy as it's celebrated, you just kind of have that connection to the one who's in office, and it influences you and has impacts on you too.
And because of that, I mean, it's one of the more important decisions that the church makes.
Oh, yeah.
As to who they select. So how does that happen?
Well, I think in the most recent events of this past year, I mean, first you've seen the resignation, the retirement of a bishop or a pope in office was something we haven't seen in over 500 years. With Benedict XVI making that surprise announcement in February, just threw everyone off guard, and that was something new to everyone. Usually when this happens, the reigning or preceding pope has died, and so they go through that process and ritual, and then the cardinals stay on for the conclave. But here Benedict announced his retirement, and he was going to resign at the end of February, and that gave the cardinals and church around the world time to think about this. And so it was a whole new approach to this, and I think that too has made a significant impact on the election of the Pope.
And so we call it an election. Who actually? Well, it's not everybody in the whole church votes on it.
No, it's the cardinals around the world. The cardinals had to convene in Rome. And unlike preceding elections, they met previous, for a week, I think, in session. What are the concerns of the church now? And they really they didn't have that much time, in past to do that, but they had time to do this here. And we don't know exactly what was said, but all of them had a chance to speak. All the cardinals. Mm-hmm. What were their concerns? Where do they see the church today? And we know. From the news, we've been, have a few challenging issues ahead, that have been before us, and more internal things as well. And concern from all avenues of, how are we embracing the mission of the gospel? So they were able to address these, and then they went into the conclave, where it's a closed-door session in the Sistine Chapel, and it has to be 2/3. And so the voting for Francis, it took 5 ballots, and I guess he accumulated, from I hear, we're at 90 votes, so that gave him the majority.
Mm-hmm. Now, how many cardinals are there then?
I think there was for the voting, 120, almost 120.
120, and how do people how would someone become a cardinal?
Well, there's the selection of the Pope. Whoever's in office, names the cardinals. Does that every so often. But there always has to be 120, for whatever may happen for the election of a pope. So they want to maintain that. In this conclave, there was the pope or the cardinals that were selected, and part of the voting were majority were selected by John Paul II and a good number from Benedict XVI. So I was a little concerned at that point.
and so now we have a cardinal evidently was elected pope. So
Right.
When he's elected, when a cardinal's elected pope, a lot of decisions are made at that point, and one of them is the name of the pope and a number of things like that. So. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it comes down to the voting. I read where, the voting was taking place, and once it got past 70 or 77 votes, they knew Bergoglio was going to be, they heard the name, and somebody was keeping track of it, and then they started applauding after 77, and they reached 90. And then they asked him if he wants to take the office,
So they actually have a choice at that
point. But by then,
it's pretty much determined.
Determined,
right?
yeah. So he was asked, he accepted, and then it always comes to a name, and it's significant. Like when Peter was chosen, his name was changed, when Jesus selected him, and when we are, confirmed, we choose a name, so there's just a sense that there's taking on, a deeper identity, with our spiritual journey. And I guess somebody leaned over to Bergoglio and said, don't forget the poor, and said something about Francis. And, and that stuck with him, and he said, Francis. And that was quite a selection. And number one, they weren't sure if he was talking about Francis of Xavier or Francis of Assisi, because Cardinal Bergoglio is a Jesuit. And for the Jesuits, Francis of Xavier is certainly one of their early founders with Ignatius of Loyola. So there was some confusion. Did he mean Francis of Xavier or Francis of Assisi, and being a Jesuit? But no, he clarified. He said Francis of Assisi, and so, so it's interesting with him. We have these two very strong spiritual traditions in the church: the Ignatian or Jesuits, and the Franciscans. And sometimes I have to keep thinking that he is a Jesuit, not a Franciscan. And so, but those two spiritualities are very strong in our church. And then I think, and a lot of people, non-Catholics have a big love for Francis. He's one of those saints probably that crosses all kinds of religious lines. And also, I know in the Ignatian spirituality, the spiritual exercises and going on a 40-day retreat is not just a Catholic thing. A lot of Protestants, non-Catholics have gone through the spiritual exercises. So there's their ecumenical grounding there in many ways with that name and his religious tradition.
Yeah, and so let's talk a little bit about those religious traditions. I mean, you had indicated before when we were talking out in the lobby before we even came in here about a little bit about your experience in Ignatian spirituality. So what is it that what is implied in that? What is part of that?
Well, St. Ignatius, when he was wounded in war and recovering from his wounds, it was just a significant moment for him. He had nothing left, and he had so much time on his hands, he was looking for something to do. So the only thing available to him was a Bible and a book on the lives of the saints. So he read those and prayed with them. And the Bible and the lives of the saints impacted his spirituality and conversion. And out of that too came what is known as the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. And it's a 40-day retreat. And Jesuits in training, in which is a long formation period, they really take the retreat twice, the 40-day retreat twice, at the beginning and at the end. I happened, when I was on sabbatical in 1989, I did the Ignatian retreat in 40 days up in Guelph, Ontario, which had a great reputation for the spiritual exercises. And it impacts you, like, really. I mean, I feel the grace of that 40 days still in my life today, and that was 24 years ago. And I'd like to see it maybe happen again in my life, sometime, because it's just a deeply spiritual experience. It is to immerse one on the retreat into the gospel, into the life of Jesus. It's following the life of Christ. And they call it on imagination, but it's not that, imagine, superficially. Is you immerse yourselves into the gospel scene in a personal way. And you pray that gospel 5 times every day. And then you journal about it. So it's, when I look at it, that's 5 hours and about 3 hours of writing. It's about an 8-hour day you're praying that gospel. So that for Cardinal Bergoglio, who was a Jesuit, he has done that twice. And that impacted, I'm sure, in his life. And as a Jesuit, a novice master, he was guiding, those to be Jesuits through the retreat as well.
And then this Jesuit chooses Saint Francis as his
of Assisi
as his mentor. I mean that's interesting too, isn't it? Right. So he was the first Saint.
Pope Francis.
Pope Francis. Right.
No one, and there's significance, I guess, and I'll share a personal story. When I was going through this transition, I shared with you out in the lobby that, I was just concerned where we're going to go with this new papacy, and realizing how much we are facing us. There's a lot that needs to be done in the church. And my intention for the new pope, one, they'd be a servant leader. I just find that's what we're called to be, as servant leaders. And I think too much look at power, and clericalism has hurt us. It's been abuse through clericalism. And would the next pope be one who's a servant leader? And then the day before the conclave, I just happened to look up, and I just wanted to see if anyone's taken the name Francis, and no one did. And I thought, if that would be a real indication for me.
Right.
And I was shocked when he took the name Francis. I thought it was his cardinal name was Francis, but it wasn't. He took the name Francis. And Francis just, evokes, real humility, and you identify Francis with the poor. And as we've read in his life story, he's just been a very humble man in Argentina, and we see this in Rome right now. He identifies with the poor. He's spoken a lot about the poor. And he lives a simple life. He didn't choose the apostolic palace.
Right.
He's living in a 2-room hotel, where the cardinals stay for the conclave at Casa Santa Marta, and he's living there. No ornate room or anything, and he's also dining with the staff and eating with the staff and interacting with them and having mass with them.
Right.
I mean, that's all different.